Illuminated by IEEE Photonics is a podcast series that shines light on the hot topics in photonics and the subject matter experts advancing technology forward.
Hi, my name is Daniel Renner, and I'm the chair of the IEEE Photonic Society Industry Engagement Committee. And we're here today to talk about working in a startup company. How does it feel to work in a startup, unique environment? And to do that, I have with me two young engineers that have been working for several years in a startup, and we're looking at they sharing their experience on what has it meant to them to working in this environment. We have worked, the three of us, actually together for many years, so we know each other fairly well. And we hope that the conversation will be of interest in the sense of providing tips, advice to other young engineers that are considering working in a startup. The two other people that are going to participate in this conversation are Woodson and Stephen Estrella. So I'll let them introduce themselves. So Maddie, if you can start to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Thanks, Daniel. Hi, my name is Woodson. I became interested in photonics sort of towards the end of my undergraduate studies and decided that I wanted to continue studying with a focus in photonics in graduate school. So I did that at the University of Virginia, where I focused on developing low noise avalanche photodiodes. And as I was finishing up my degree, I came out to Santa Barbara, California to interview with Freedom and started just a couple months later. So I've now been here about 6 years, and I am the technical lead for a small team of engineers developing various photodiode technologies and products here at Freedom.
Great. Thank you, Maddie. Stephen?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. My name is Stephen Estrella. A little bit of a different path from Maddie. I actually started at Freedom back in 2009. I was an intern engineer and got to grow with the company. As I asked more and more questions, I think I got more and more to do, which was great. Got to learn a lot. And then as I went through my undergraduate degree, became fascinated with photonics, and then many years later decided to go back to graduate school and finish that up. And now I work more on the business side. So I'm the director of business development, and looking forward to growing the company, and still am fascinated by photonics.
Thank you, Stephen. That's great. So where should we start? Obviously, talking about a startup company involves many different facets, and I think it would be interesting to start perhaps on company culture. This is something that is obviously very important for everyone involved. In the company, and in many ways, culture can be quite different in a startup compared to larger companies or other organizations such as universities and such. So maybe the best place would be to start by maybe each one of you trying to describe what do you think is company culture, and how is it shaped within an organization? Maddie?
Sure. Well, I think company culture is sort of this unwritten, unspoken set of standards, I guess, for how the people within the company interact with one another, and also, externally with customers as well. But I think that culture tends to be more of like an insular type thing. Generally, I think that some of this is, comes from the top. Some of this is what the management dictates is sort of how people will behave within the company, and what are the priorities, um, things like that. But there's also some culture, I think, that's cultivated in more of sort of a grassroots way from, the employees working at the company, just in the way that they interact with each other, and patterns that tend to arise tend to repeat themselves. And I think that there's also a degree of, we're hiring people that we enjoy working with, and so we're sort of, perpetuating the culture through things like that. What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, no, that's great. When I look at a business, I think about, like, what is a business, right? And I think it ultimately boils down to the people, right? You don't have just some autonomous thing kind of running, not yet at least. And so it really requires people to operate and to do what's needed to run a business. So when I look at culture, it's very much embedded with the people. And I think the culture ultimately is like one of the foundations, right, upon which hopefully a successful business is built upon. And depending on obviously what you're doing and what that model is, there's many ways that this can work, but I think successful businesses have a good culture. And so what is a culture? I think it's, as you describe, it's how people interact together and also with the business. I think if you have a good team and people who work really well together, chances are you'll be very successful. But I think the business itself also has to support the people around that, and therefore has to have some type of guidance as to how we're gonna work together, how we're gonna accomplish great things, right? And so therefore, I think culture is how we treat each other, how we support each other. It's the leadership that's involved. It's the ability to grow. It's the also ability to make mistakes, right? We have to be able to have that and still have a supportive, work environment. And of course, to be able to have fun, right? I think good teams also know how to have a good time and support one another, just as any other sports team. Let's say, got to celebrate your wins, got to come together and support each other on losses. So I think culture kind of encompasses all those pieces together, and good cultures basically, I think, result in very successful companies.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. I think that a business can only be successful in a traditional way, say by making a profit. I mean, that's the most traditional way of defining a successful business, but it can only be successful in that traditional way by perhaps a non-traditional or historically not necessarily so traditional approach of really fostering a culture that is supportive of the interests of everyone involved, and certainly of everybody working in the company. And as you mentioned, in order to do that, developing a social network internally by sort of promoting activities or making sure that the environment, the culture is such that, as you have mentioned, grassroots activities are possible, and people feel like that is something that can be done, is very important. So I think it would be really interesting if, I know that both of you have developed some very specific grassroots activities that have shaped the culture within the company. So if you can talk specifically about that, because I think those are great ideas or examples on how a culture can be affected by individuals and can develop.
All right, yeah, I'll take a swing, I guess. So I think one activity, that we've kind of implemented, and I think Maddie and I both have kind of done this, is in the form of like sports teams. We have, a lot of say young engineers, and I think part of having a successful business and having a good psychological space is to be physically active. I think there's a lot of benefit. And it's also a good way to bond, even outside of work, and you end up, talking about things during work too. And so it just brings people closer together. So I think one of the first kind of activities that we embarked on, I guess, was having a softball team. I think we actually still have that even today. But we've been doing this for a few years, and the company has been gracious to help sponsor that, and I think that realizes some of the benefits. But it's great, we get all the engineers together. We're at various levels of ability, but it's great to kind of come together and do something that's not exactly photonics related, but builds a team, right? So I think there's definitely some ancillary positive benefit there. So something as simple as that, as coming together, forming a team, and just having a good time together. This is something that we organically kind of decided that we wanted to do, and we've gone off and done it. And in some cases, we've been successful and have won championships and things like that. Other seasons maybe not as successful, but still, I think it's a way to bring us together and to have an activity that's sort of outside of work and continues to foster that sort of sense of community and culture even within the office, right, on and off the field. What do you think, Maddie?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a softball team, we've had soccer teams, we have people who go on lunchtime runs together. And yeah, like Steven said, sometimes we're successful in maybe what Daniel would call a traditional event, and we win a championship or some sort of, blue ribbon for the season. But a lot of the times, I think some of the success is just making people who are maybe new to the company feel welcome. The year that I started at Freedom, I joined the softball team that Steven was running. I'd never played softball before. I'm still pretty terrible at softball, but it provided, a really nice way to get to know a lot of my coworkers and, a low stress setting where people are really, acting, like themselves. There's less of like I guess like a barrier to talking to people when you're collaborating on something like a softball team, and I think that translates over really well to collaborating with those same people on projects. It just kind of lowers the intimidation of being new at a company and not knowing how to really start a conversation with someone. You immediately have something in common with your colleagues that are on the same sports team or something like that. And we recognize we're engineers. We're not we're not all athletes. But I think that being welcoming to everyone, regardless of what level they're at, that's a really positive part of our culture here too.
Yeah, I think that you both have been great examples on how individuals in the organization can shape the culture through being sort of the leaders of initiating this sort of maybe in a way, say we can call it extracurricular activities, but on the other hand, they're not really extracurricular, they're necessary. And I think the impact has been felt very well. And as you say, what you learned about working as a team in a soccer field, definitely there are lessons learned there on how to operate as a team in a project as well. And so it's all part and parcel of the same thing. One important aspect of the culture, obviously, is how people relate to each other. So, and here, any comment that you might want to venture, if you look at the relationships in your experience of what it was or what it is or what it should have been or what it should be, whatever, in connection to relationships 360 degrees around you, i.e. the people that report to you, your peers, and the company leadership. And you can tackle this in any way you want, either one of you.
Yeah, so I think, when we're talking and thinking about sort of the culture and sort of the activities that we do, I think that's really important, right? And it's important to have those kind of interactions because I think it also builds a sense of trust, right? Once you make a fool of yourself in front of your fellow colleagues by doing some extracurricular activity, right, it kind of lowers the barrier, right? It normalizes everybody. It makes you realize everyone's human, which is important. Because at the end of the day, we all have to find a way to work together, right? And I think that applies sort of up, down, and all around, I guess, if you want to call it sort of the 360 view. So Obviously, working directly with your peers, sort of, let's say, laterally, I think that definitely helps. But then when you're doing these activities, both maybe with people who work above and below you, I think it builds those bonds, makes them stronger, and again, kind of reinforces sort of this level of trust, and which I think is really important. So I think there's just a lot of benefits to just being able to have those kind of activities, those interactions, whether they're sort of in the office, outside of the office, because you need to be able to approach people, and they need to be able to approach you too, right? It's a two-way street for sure. So I think all of those things are really necessary, and I'd still kind of put those under the umbrella of kind of like culture, right? It's still all sort of necessary, and I think that bidirectional trust is really quintessential for having, again, a successful business and having good culture.
Totally. Yeah, I'd echo what Stephen's saying, and maybe just another element to add to that is that frequently when you're interacting with people, on these sports teams or outside of work, maybe at like a company event or something like that, you're, as Stephen said, you're interacting with people both who work above you and below you, and as well as lateral to you. But you frequently end up interacting with people who your day-to-day work doesn't necessarily push you to work with. If I'm working on the photodiode team, I might not necessarily interact with someone on our laser team on a day-to-day basis. But in having, those conversations at like a company barbecue or something like that, it's really interesting to hear what people are working on. And sometimes you'll find that you're tackling very similar problems as people on another team. And having those sort of like, low pressure interactions gives you an opportunity not only to get to know people who you're not necessarily going to interact with, like I said, on a day-to-day basis, but also to try to, float solutions and ideas past people who have, that different perspective from you and have maybe a different background. And that ends up being, I think, something that, is technically really useful about just these social engagements,
Yeah, absolutely. And these sort of networking opportunities, if you want, of meeting people that are working in other areas, obviously help communication. And so that communication and trust that you mentioned too are two key elements in the operation of any organization, and certainly in a startup, without which, again, success is not possible. So let's change gears a little bit. It's still, in a way, part of culture, but you've mentioned about sort of very top level your professional development in the past few years within the company. Um, let's expand that a little bit more. If you can talk about your professional growth within a startup company. What have you experienced directly? What has been good? What maybe has not been so good? Stephen, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think anytime you envision like a startup, right? It's you might think, okay, it's happening in someone's basement or garage, or who knows, in some small little corner. And I think that's still pretty much true. Usually startups have kind of humble beginnings, and I would think and say, I think Freedom is an example of that as well. And because you don't start out with a whole lot in terms of infrastructure or resources, you have to be very creative. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? So you have very limited money, limited resources, limited time to try to do something amazing. And I think that's part of the allure of being with a startup, is that you really get a chance to get involved with all kinds of different things. I think I had no idea what I was getting myself into in a positive way when I joined Freedom. I didn't expect that I would be exposed to so many various aspects of the company. I think when you're an engineer, you think, okay, well, all I'm going to do is, maybe some engineering. And I think maybe in some cases that's true. But again, because of the needs are great and the workers are few, it means that people are going to wear, by necessity, kind of various different hats. And I think I consider that to be like a benefit of working with a startup. So yes, like there's obviously your traditional engineering work that has to get done, design something, fabricate something, test something. But there's also various aspects that comprise a business as well. There's the financial aspects, there's the program management aspect, there's the sales, there's the marketing. I mean, all these little things basically. And I think in my experience, if I kind of just look from a high level, I guess kind of looking all the way back through my career, I think I had, good fortune, good benefit of being interested in all these things and being given the opportunity to engage in those activities, willingly. I wanted to try those out, and I got that kind of exposure. So as I mentioned, kind of in the beginning of the intro, like I started out as an intern. I was doing PCB layout, nothing photonic related, but turns out PCB layout is not too dissimilar from photonic integrated circuit layout. So I saw what the founders were doing, and I said, hey, what is that? Can I do that? And, yeah, absolutely. And so you design something, it gets fabricated. Okay, well, you designed it. Now you get to test it, right? Let's see how that turned out. So, you start getting into, test and measurement. There's a lot of learning there. Okay, well, now we need to package this device, and okay, how do we do that? So there's learning sort of on the packaging aspect. And then, after a few iterations of that, okay, now, think about how we would do this differently. Is there another application or project that we can kind of go after and apply this technology? And kind of, it's a little bit of a snowball effect. Once you kind of gather these skills up, you're able to kind of do more and be given more responsibility. And I think that's kind of been the trajectory, I guess, that I've kind of followed. Is I've been with the company for a long time, but I've done, I think, quite a bit. I've had the opportunity to do that. And also exploring various aspects. I was doing a lot of engineering, and now I'm more on the business side of things too. And so I think that's just evidence of being given that opportunity to try to explore things and obviously hopefully excel, of course. But I think that's one of the benefits of the small company, is that there is no shortage of work to be done in various areas, and you can basically pursue those pieces and kind of go off and explore. And I think there's just a lot of benefit, even from just an engineering perspective. Engineering encompasses so many different things, and I think the more exposure you get to that, gives you a really good holistic perspective to then really focus in on what you want to do. But if you have an understanding of why it needs to be done a particular way from a business perspective, or from a financial perspective, or from a marketing perspective, I think that's really beneficial in the long run. So all those experiences and things, I think, add up pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that really drew me to Freedom was, I remember sitting in my interview and our CEO telling me, well, you're going to wear a lot of hats if you work here. That's a phrase that we throw around a lot here. I would say that if you have a fear of boredom, you should join a startup. I also felt like I was given a lot of opportunities to really explore what it was that I was interested in. I would voice some interest in program management, and within a month or two, that sort of opportunity was given to me as something I could try out. I had an interest in business development. I was able to try a little bit of that out too. Something that's been really cool at Freedom is I think we have a lot of mentors in a lot of different areas here. We have people with strong technical backgrounds, strong business backgrounds, strong program management backgrounds, and that kind of like helps shape this culture of really like passionate, curious people who are really eager to help. And this is sort of like this cyclic process of, oh, someone's eager to help and they're given something that they're able to help out on. So the management, really facilitates that by supporting the curiosity of the individuals who are working here. And something that I think is kind of neat about startup is you're really like, you have this like web of skills that's shared across the company. There's not like there's one person who does this one thing at the company. No, there's like 3 or 4 people who all have some experience with that. And I think that, you have to be careful not to spread yourself too thin. You don't want that like web of skills to become like a tangle of like unclear who's responsible for what. But I think it makes for a really strong company, both in terms of culture and in expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stephen, you have a very unique professional growth path in the sense that you did your PhD studies while you were working. And I must say you were working 150% as well as doing a PhD 150%. And I think this is something that might be interesting to share your experience of overcoming all of those hurdles and succeeding and doing a PhD while working.
Yeah, that was quite an interesting journey, and I'm glad I went through that. I will say up front. That said, yeah, it would definitely was a lot of work. And I guess I'll kind of go all the way back to the beginning and kind of quickly come up to where we are. But when I was interviewing with the company, they asked me, what do you want to do long term? And I said, I want to do what you do. I think one day I'd like to have maybe a company or get my PhD and do what you guys do, which is kind of go after these really cool projects and do all these kind of wonderful things. And I saw them kind of look at each other and like, oh, okay, yeah. And lo and behold, I think that was I don't know, maybe 10 years later or something like that. I did it. I did go off and kind of get that PhD. And I would say it felt kind of natural in the sense, we're working with a lot of smart people, and you're just kind of immersed sort of in this environment, and it just kind of reinforced, my desire to do that of like, okay, I am doing the work, I am operating at that level, so I should be able to do this, right? So that opportunity kind of came up. As I mentioned, I graduated from UCSB. I think it was in 2010. And then I continued working for about 6 years before going back to graduate school in 2016. So my comment there is, if you're interested in going to graduate school, fantastic, but probably don't wait that long. I think it was really challenging to be in industry kind of so long. You get comfortable, you have your way of life, and then to kind of be thrown back into that setting was challenging. I think my first year, I definitely struggled, just trying to get back into that sort of academic mindset, trying to balance life, trying to balance work. Eventually I did go off and talk to, a counselor or advisor at school, and they're like, so what's going on in your life? And I said, well, I'm going to school, I'm working full time, I'm doing all these things. And they said, wow, yeah, I think we need to, sounds like you're doing a lot. We should try to figure out how to kind of divide and conquer. And I think that was really good advice. So having kind of those boundaries of, when I'm at school, I'm focused at school. When I'm at work, I'm focused at work. And to try as best as I can to kind of keep those separate, just so that I can kind of focus. And then I'm happy to say in the second year and the years after, I did amazingly well after that, trying to implement sort of that approach. The other aspect I think that kind of made this possible is, the work I was doing, my thesis work, was of interest both to the university and to the company. So, I was working on silicon photonics for harsh environments. And so that project basically was kind of one and the same. What I was doing for my research at UCSB was the same as my quote unquote day job. at Freedom. And so I kind of like to point to this sort of overlap integral, that it needs to be very close to 1 or 100%. If they can be as similar as possible, I think the chances of success, become that much more, tangible. Because I think if you're pulled in kind of 2 different directions, I don't know. I'm not that person. I don't think I could have done that. But maybe someone else can. But at least for me, being able to focus kind of on one thing and do it well was kind of the key to success. So I'd say if you do, try to go off to work simultaneously and to go to graduate school, really try to find something that, you can kind of use for both purposes, dual purpose, as it were. Because it's challenging enough just pursuing a PhD, and it's challenging enough to be successful in a job. So my recommendation would be to try to make those as similar as possible. So yeah, it was I learned a lot about myself going through that, and hopefully I made my scientific contributions there as well. But I think in the end it was really a fantastic experience, and I think it was pretty unique in that sense. And so if someone has the opportunity to do it, I definitely recommend go for it. But just keep in mind the journey ahead and kind of what it takes to do that, and to try to find a balance between work, life, school. All those are really important. And definitely to have fun too, right? You gotta find ways to enjoy what you're doing, because life is short. So I think being able to celebrate some of those wins, being able to, celebrate with your friends, your family, your loved ones, I think that's all important. They're all part of that journey too. Your colleagues too, your coworkers. I think I had a lot of support from them too. So all those pieces kind of have to come together, or should, to kind of make that journey possible. So I'm grateful that I've done that.
Yeah, it was quite extraordinary to follow what you were doing at that time, and you did really extraordinarily well. Told you this in the past, but congratulations again. It was quite a challenge. Maddie, you followed perhaps what is sort of the more conventional path of doing a PhD before going to work, sort of sequential rather than in parallel. Can you comment on the transition from doing a PhD to coming into Freedom Photonics, going to a startup? What comes to your mind? Do you feel that your PhD prepared you for the work ahead? Is there anything that could have been done different or not? And so, what do you remember about the transition from one to the other?
Yeah, that's a great question, Daniel. As you know, I think most people know, it's difficult really to do any photonic research or even really take a class on photonics in most undergraduate programs. So I saw, photonics as something I was interested in, and that sort of necessitated going to graduate school. And at the time, it actually lined up quite well for me, because this was sort of around the time of the recession, and it was difficult to find jobs. I thought, well, I enjoy learning. I'll continue to go to school. But something that I really admire about Stephen's path is that, Stephen, you really came in with not only this hands-on experience of you'd done some layout, you'd seen some devices, but you also came in with this really great sense of context. And I think that's something that I see as a difference in our graduate schooling. I think like many PhD students, I was really hyper focused on the technology that I was working on. When you're in graduate school, I think it's easy to fall into this state of you're really trying to push the boundaries of the state of the art, but you're not tasked with making any money off of it. So you're not necessarily understanding a market. We're trying to make a manufacturable product. You're really trying to get one hero device that with the right phase of the moon, you can measure the right parameters and get sort of excellent performance. And that was a major change in coming to Freedom was, oh well, I mean, a lot of our work that we do and have done here at Freedom has been very researchy, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to continue to work on, research and development, which I think is quite fun. But at the same time, you need to do these things keeping in mind, well, maybe this chip needs to go into a package one day. How are we going to handle that? That was something, that in graduate school, I was much more focused on, the epitaxial stack and the fabrication of a device. But working at Freedom really kind of expanded, um, the context for which I'm thinking about these devices. Now I'm thinking, okay, well, what's this going to look like if it needs to go into a package, or what sort of system is this going to go into? What sort of markets does this address? And all of that kind of gives you, some extra tools as an engineer to think about when you're designing a product.
Yeah, exactly. Like every engineer finishing his or her studies, broadly speaking, you had a choice of going to a small company, a startup, or going to a large company, or continuing at a university and follow the academic path. Obviously, you chose going to a startup, so we're all biased, I guess, in our opinions. But how do you see sort of life at a startup compared to life at a larger company? Or in a university. And again, I warn the listener that we're all biased here, but in an as unbiased way as you can.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I think that really like that promise that I would get to do a wide variety of things was really a major draw for me to join a small company. Um, I was nervous about getting siloed into doing just one sort of thing. And I think I had that sort of trepidation about going to a larger company. I didn't want to be uh, necessarily someone who just does one task day in and day out. Um, but I think I liked the idea of joining a company rather than staying at a university and being a part of actually making something that people would get to use one day. Um, it, I mean, this is not to cast any shade on universities. Universities develop incredible technologies that are often, scooped up by a small business or a large business, and products are made from those technologies. But I guess I wanted to be part of that process. I wanted to see, how a technology goes from an idea or a paper to something that a customer can buy off the shelf. That was really the pull for me to join a small business.
Yeah, I agree with what Maddie said. And I think for me, when I look at what you can do, or at least the promise of what you can do at a startup versus a larger company, I think there's, potentially more there, right? You get the chance to tackle a wide variety of things. I think I'll take a different sort of vector as well. There's also the financial part of it too, right? It's an investment. So the hope is, if you join a startup, hopefully the startup blossoms into, the next unicorn or whatever the terminology is now today of being a very, very successful business. And when you are a part of that, the hope is obviously you get to go along for that ride as well. But as I kind of mentioned, usually when a young startup is kind of getting going, there's not a lot of money obviously to kind of pay you. So you get to do a lot, but maybe compensation might not be as high. And I think larger companies, by definition, tend to have more revenue, more people. They can have people be a little bit more focused in what they do, and potentially they also get compensated a little bit more. So there's this kind of, I don't know, at least for me, when I was kind of looking at it, it's like, well, what matters to me most, right? And I think everyone they're at different stages in their lives, and what matters more to them. But for me, I think, I chose to go with the startup because I saw it as an investment, not only sort of in professional development, but hopefully financial as well, right? And we did eventually become, acquired by Luminar Technologies, so that there is success in that. But that's not always the case for every startup, right? Not every startup succeeds. So it's a risk. It's a risk reward, I think, kind of balance. And for those, I think, who are more risk tolerant, yeah, I think a startup kind of makes sense. And for those who are not so tolerant, they may choose to go with a larger company.
Yeah, exactly. There is some risk. I mean, the numbers, the common knowledge numbers are 1 in 10 startups succeed, and I don't know if that's exactly right, but certainly the odds are against you. But something that I've found out is that in larger companies, the odds relating to the group where you are at are not necessarily much different. You're always part of a smaller group within a large company, so um, the risk is there, and it's not so much of a risk in the sense that even though some companies might go under, the industry, like in this case, the photonics industry, flourishes, grows, has grown exponentially. And so even though maybe some companies have not succeeded, the industry overall does. And with that, everybody involved. So there's always another opportunity. One important aspect in sort of engineering life is engineers love to tell the world about what they're doing and what they've accomplished. And it's human nature. I mean, not only engineers as part of being part of humanity. Now, this is an aspect where universities and industry differ quite a bit in the sense that it is the purpose and the task of universities, obviously, to increase human knowledge and thus sort of spreading this over everywhere. The new knowledge is an important part of the function of university. In industry, spreading knowledge is important too, but in somewhat of a more restricted sense. Obviously, there are some aspects of what industries do that cannot be discussed outside of the company. It would be interesting if you could mention what your experience has been in the sense of publishing as part of industry, as part of a small company. What's been your experience there?
Yeah, they are different environments and therefore different motivations. I think from an academic perspective, right, you publish results out there also with the intent of sort of like having it be able to be verified, replicated. So it's in your interest to kind of explain how everything is done, because hopefully someone else has the ability to replicate sort of that experiment or that result, which means intimate knowledge is needed of everything that kind of went in there. And it's also a way, obviously, to contribute, overall to the scientific body of knowledge. And I think when you look at sort of from an industrial perspective, why one would publish, the motivation is a little bit different. It's to make people aware of what the company has done, or the person, right, involved in that. But companies have, an incentive to not release all the details of what was done there, right? There's potentially intellectual property and trade secrets that may have gone into that result, and if that were just freely dispersed, well, then it means someone else could replicate what you did, and then that means that you've lost sort of your competitive advantage. So that potentially could have a negative impact on the business. So I think the reason why an industrial entity might decide to publish is really kind of more from the marketing perspective of saying, hey, we've done this great thing, we can do it again for you. We're making this great new product. It has these amazing new performance, and we can do that for you. And so hopefully that draws, more customers and therefore more revenue to the company. Whereas there is really, I wouldn't say a financial incentive for an academic institution to do that. It's really to contribute, knowledge to sort of the body of science, as it were. What do you think, Maddie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maybe there's an argument to be made that there is perhaps a financial motivation even for a university. They're looking to prove that they've got the know-how and that they can, uh, deliver on a contract or a grant that they're offered. But it is quite different. Um, Something that I sort of use as a metaphor is that, like, we have our secret sauce recipe. That could be our epitaxial structure. That could be some fabrication techniques that we have here. And while I think in some other industries, you might protect that with something like a patent, um, that's not necessarily the best protection, right? In the world of semiconductors, it's quite hard to prove that your competitor is using the same epitaxial stack as you, or that they're using a particular fabrication technique that you've patented. Um, the onus of proving that is really challenging when you're talking about uh, these devices that are really precisely manufactured in a clean room, and then um, yeah, for which it's not necessarily easy to I guess analyze that what a chip might be composed of, or things like that. It becomes a much more complicated problem than it might be in say another industry. So what I guess learned over the years is that rather than filing a patent on something, people will just generally keep trade secrets within the company, and they don't release that information outside of the company. Let's see. I just noticed that we lost our network connection. I don't know if you can still hear me through my phone. Okay.
Yeah, no, I can hear you, no problem.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I think that's sort of the end of what I was going to say there anyway.
Yeah, thank you. That certainly there are differences there, but still, it is possible to publish in industry with a slightly different tone, as it were. And as you highlighted, the objectives are different in industry as industry publishes compared to university. Changing direction a little bit in the conversation, over the past few years, people have worked remotely significantly, and whether full-time remotely or part-time, a mix, a hybrid, some time remote, some time on site. What's been your experience, and what do you think? What's a sort of right balance between working remotely and working on site?
So we're remote, right? We're doing this. Although for the listeners, Maddie and I are actually sitting across from each other. But I think what we found from this unfortunate event is again, necessity is kind of the mother of invention here. We found ways to still kind of be productive, and so I think hopefully that there is an agreement that working sort of remote is definitely possible and doable. Now, is that right for every particular job? Probably not. I think there are instances where people kind of need to be where the work is at, and because they're more hands-on, or they need to interact with people a little bit more intimately. But I think if we look at it from an experiment, let's say a social experiment, I think the evidence is there that we can still be productive. Now, that said, I think we're all social animals, and I think there is that element of and desire maybe for most people to want to be kind of together, right? To kind of be in the same room, let's say. Matt, you brought up the example of being at a barbecue and like talking to people, and it's like, well, that happened because we were all brought together, right? And so I think if you're entirely remote, it's not impossible, but I think it's a little more challenging, right? To kind of have those happenstance experiences, or just you walk by somebody and something happens, and who knows, maybe you have another great idea, but that may not have been possible if you weren't really sort of in the same building or very close by. So I think there are times when we're doing particular work where it's like, well, I can be off wherever, I need to do that. And I don't necessarily need to, be on site or have physical sort of proximity. But then I think there are times where it does make sense, and there may be that need. So I think that the hybrid model hopefully is kind of here to stay. I think that very much is possible. Now, where is that right balance? I don't know. I think we're still all kind of figuring that out. But at least from a kind of humanistic perspective, I think there is still a lot of good benefit for people to actually be closer together. I think that tends to help things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, one of the positive parts of, as you said, a really terrible event was that I would say that remote work kind of pushed conferencing technology. It pushed, our ability to work online. But it is really hard to like synthesize that like water cooler talk that you're talking about, Stephen. It's like that sort of like random happenstance like doesn't really come to pass on like a Zoom meeting. And further, I think that, when you try to force something like that, it doesn't feel organic to have, a group of 50 people on a Zoom call trying to make it feel like a normal conversation. It's simply not the way I think that humans interact. And yeah, absolutely. I'd say that I'm also sort of a social creature. I'd prefer to be in the office, and I'd prefer to be working with other people directly. But of course, I think like many other employees, I mean, I appreciate the flexibility of a hybrid model. It's nice to, if I have something that I need to do in the middle of the day and I feel like I can get something done later on, that sort of flexibility I think has been a positive change generally. But yeah, figuring out where the fulcrum is, I guess, to balance how much time you should spend remote versus working in person, it's a tough question to answer. And I think it's further complicated by the fact that there are parts of our job that can't necessarily be done remotely. I mean, there are technicians and engineers here at Freedom for whom, very little, if any, of their job can be done remotely because they need to be in the lab and they need to be doing things that are hands-on. And I think that, there's a degree too of solidarity of trying, even if you can do a task remotely, to being around and available for people who might, need your help hands-on in the lab or need some input from you.
Great, thank you. Changing topics again. The three of us were attracted by photonics technology, photonics industry, right at the beginning of our careers for some magical reasons. I personally don't always understand why it happened, but it did happen. And it happened very strongly. Basically, it's kept me in this for the whole of my career, and it's been wonderful. But if now we address people that are where we were then, thinking of what area should they choose for their career, what can you tell them about photonics today? How does it look going forward? What can they expect in their career for somebody that is looking at starting right now?
So I don't remember like the exact moment that I knew that I was going to do photonics for practically the rest of my life, but I remember sort of what happened. I was actually working for a robotics company before coming to Freedom. And during my undergraduate studies, I took a class on fiber optic communication system. It was the only class right at the undergraduate level I could take. And I don't know what it was, professor, the material, but I just, during that class, I just knew this is what I'm going to do. I couldn't explain it. and I knew that I had to find a way to kind of become a part of this kind of emerging field. That's kind of how I came to Freedom. But kind of looking forward, I guess, what's interesting is to kind of see how much photonics is actually permeating other disciplines. And those lines are kind of becoming a little bit more blurred, which is great. I think it's fantastic, because that means that, doing things with light is finding so many applications in other areas. I mean, for medicine, for health, for obviously communications, yes, but for sensing, for um, astronomy, for, I mean, just like wherever you look, I mean, people are actively trying to see how light can be applied to kind of further advance that particular domain. So I guess, if you're intrigued by light, if you look at a rainbow and think like, how does that work? Or you look at through a pool and like, okay, well, why is that object over there? These are kind of the things that we kind of notice as a child, and you have that kind of childlike wonder. And I think it still applies today. I think we know why, obviously, that happens. But if you find yourself kind of looking at those kinds of problems and kind of asking yourself why, then maybe photonics is kind of right for you. And I guess not to be worried to think that maybe, well, if I go into photonics, all I'm going to do is work on fiber optic communication systems. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think photonics is kind of really finding many, many more areas of applicability, and I think that's really exciting. I think it's really exciting to be a part of that, and to see that we might be surrounded by photonics more than we might think currently right now. Maybe it'll be in our hands. I guess it really is, right? We if you think of your iPhone, if you have an iPhone, I mean, there's sensors that are already in there that make use of these principles. And so whether you see it or not, I guess we are surrounded by things that are driven by light. And I think the future, if I can make a joke, it looks pretty bright for photonics. And so for people who are interested, definitely go for it. I think there's no shortage of problems to be solved. And I think you'd be pretty pleased at where it can be applied and how much benefit there is for society.
Yes, Stephen, I think you touched on some good applications, but there are even like buzzier applications too, right? Like you're well aware of the quantum computing and communications efforts that are going on, and then of course we work for an automotive lidar company. Those are, I would say, like they're kind of like applications that are in the news a lot right now. I guess another comment that I have on what sort of the beauty or the joy, if you want, of photonics is I think pretty clearly there's a lot of physics involved, but it's not just physics. There's optics, there's mechanical engineering, there's systems engineering. There's really a pretty broad variety of topics that you'll be involved in if you join the photonics community. And as like I said before, if you're a curious person, if you're afraid of boredom, this is a pretty nice field to be in. There's a lot going on, and I'd echo the future is bright for sure.
Is there anything else that we haven't said that you would like to say?
Well, I just want to say I think this is great. I think being able to talk about sort of our experiences and tap into people's brains to kind of understand like what's it like being in photonics. I think that's a really neat opportunity. So I guess I encourage this kind of dialogue kind of going forward. So I think for me, I'm grateful to kind of have this opportunity and to share it with you, Daniel, and Maddie. And as you mentioned, we kind of all work together. So it's just it's a great way to kind of talk about sort of our common experience. And I think it's also been neat to see kind of where we differ and where we have commonalities. So again, evidence of just kind of being together and being able to discuss and communicate. So thanks for the opportunity.
Maddie, anything else?
Yeah, I would echo what Stephen said. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Daniel, for leading the discussion. And it's been a lot of fun. I learned some things about Stephen that I never knew. And I've worked with him for 6 years. So this is a lot of fun, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie and Stephen, and thank you to the IEEE Photonics Society. I would like to continue talking for a long time and a lot more to talk about, but I think we should let the listeners continue what they were doing before. I hope whoever is listened to this has learned something that is useful in the sense of what working in a photonic startup is about. And thank you very much for listening to us.